At Hefty Seed Company, we do a lot of different trial work over multiple different states. We have multiple members of our research team. And today on the Agronomy Answers podcast, I brought in another member of our research team, John Wiese, who covers Minnesota and Iowa on our research team. Let's hop into it. John, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Absolutely.
We really appreciate being here, especially because it's getting into planting season, so there's going to be a lot of things happening.
Yeah.
But to start off with, this is kind of a background of what you have done, like, and how you got into Hefty Seed Company, and it's kind of there's kind of been a few different roles that you've been a part of too.
Yeah,
so
a little bit.
Just from the beginning, where are you from, and how did you get started in agriculture?
Yeah. So grew up over by Marshall, Minnesota. So southwest corner of Minnesota. Grew up on the farm, but Dad wasn't farming due to the mid 80s. And so basically just helped out on the farm with the guys that were renting the place and stuff. Always kind of knew I wanted something to do with ag. Probably didn't explore my options as well as I should have when I was in high school and stuff like that. So ended up going to school for basically diesel mechanics, ag diesel technology and things like that. And very quickly learned that I couldn't take sitting in a shop 10, 12 hours a day. I needed to be outside and do something else. So eventually ended up running as an applicator for another company for a little while. And then when Hefty Seed Company opened up in Marshall, they had some open positions, and I threw my application in there and got started there in spring of 2003. So
yeah, I was just going to ask, when did that store exactly open?
Yeah,
Because it's been a while.
Yeah, I think they opened actually like October, November of 2002. And then I started there in March of 2003. So, and I was there for quite a while. So.
Yeah. And so going into that role at being an agronomist right away there,
well, not exactly. So when I started there that spring, it was basically just working the warehouse, doing customer loadouts, doing inventory, all the things that we do every day, counting inventory and all like that. And there wasn't really anybody in the role yet there at that store. So the first day I started, the store manager just kind of said, "Warehouse is yours. Organize it however you want." All right. I organized it one way, and then I got the inventory count the first time, and I got to reorganize the warehouse completely again once I got the inventory sheet and just try and make it easy to count. But yeah, I did that through that first spring, and then starting right away that summer, I started getting into the agronomy and sales side of this.
Yeah, so when you started out into more of the agronomy side, I feel like I dealt with the exact same thing that you're probably going to say is how much experience and how much knowledge did you have going into that role versus now where you're at?
So when I first talked, about the position before I was even hired, they asked if I was, looking that I could do some sales, if I was comfortable with that and things like that. And I said, well, yeah, I'm comfortable, speaking with customers and doing sales kinds of things. That's fine. I said, I don't know a thing about seed corn or beans. Like chemical, I've done some custom app and like I can kind of get around the basics there, but I don't know anything about seed. And the response right away was like, don't worry about it. Seed numbers change every 2 years anyway. You'll catch on. And honestly, that's a little bit how it worked at the beginning. We were dealing for multiple companies at the time, and so just going to their plot days and all the information that those companies were putting on, along with our own internal stuff, you just learn a lot. It's kind of drinking from a fire hose there. So, but it was great. I mean, we did a ton of training. We still do, but yeah, taking in all the trainings that we were doing and everything like that. The first training I went to was our summer training in July, and I think it was 4 days straight here in the basement at the office when we were cramming a pretty good crew into the basement down there. And yeah, it was like 4 10-hour days in a row. And I don't know, I think I filled an entire notebook full of notes, and I don't know if I even understood what I was writing down at the time, but keep going back and rereading and repetition and starts coming on.
Yeah, it takes a while for me. I mean, I'm just kind of like starting out getting into it, and there's just so much to learn out there. Like, it
Yeah.
just takes a long time to just kind of understand and process all the different things too. So it
Yeah,
just kind of takes a while.
absolutely. And then, as years progress, you kind of get to that, okay, you start getting that background. And so now even what I'm doing, when start comparing like even new hybrids, when we're looking at new stuff, a lot of times I'm comparing that to things that I sold 20 years ago going, okay, I know where the placement of this, it acts like this corn. I know where that should go, where it shouldn't go. So it just helps. The more experience and time, you kind of start falling into it a little bit easier when you start seeing new products.
Yeah, and leading into what you're doing now with on the research side, you're dealing with the corn and the soybean all the time, and you
Yeah,
started out not even really knowing much about those
no,
two things. So it's really
it's
changed so
really
far.
changed. Yep. And that was the thing through the years, there was a couple of aspects of the ag stuff that I really kind of focused in on. And one part of it was seed, and the other part was soil fertility and things like that. Those were two sides that really interested me. So I probably did a little extra studying. A lot of, there's a fair amount of different books on my bookshelf at home. I was reading stuff at night and whenever I could, trying to find different opinions, different sizes of this, and just trying to learn what I could. But yeah, the seed part over these last few years, being on the research team, it gets crazy. And when you start talking to guys that's like all they've done most of their career is just the seed breeding and testing, you kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing. And, but now once again, 6 years into doing this, you start getting a little bit of a handle there too. So
Yeah, and kind of on that research side, as you're like looking into new products and new hybrids or varieties
yep.
that are going to farmers, what's like the process of for you looking at those
Yeah.
before recommending them to agronomists or other farmers?
Yeah. So, how it works for us for the most part, I mean, we work with a number of different breeders. Those breeders are basically the originators behind the germplasm and building those new hybrids. So they will have a few years worth of data that we get to look at. And they've kind of done some of the baseline, giving scoring for different diseases and green snap and all the little things that we're looking at all the time. So we get some base knowledge that way. But then when we go through and see something that we decide this could work for our brand, then we bring it in as an experimental. And those experimentals range from year to year. This year, I believe we're sitting somewhere around 50 or 55 new experimentals throughout our maturity range this year. So that becomes a little bit of a daunting task because now it's going out, putting those in trials, taking a look at it specifically in areas that we do business in. Some of the breeders that we work with are coming from other areas of the country. They specialize in, true like I-state kind of, corn country. So as we, especially, working a lot in South Dakota, North Dakota, Western Minnesota, down into Nebraska, and we deal with a lot of different things than you see in Illinois, Indiana. So drought tolerance is a big one for us. Green snap is another big one. I mean, anybody that's been out here knows the wind can blow. And so those are things that we really try and hone in on and do within our own research so that we get a secondary look on it besides just the breeder notes.
Yeah, just looking in one step further into like more of our area because some of those breeders, they can maybe showcase some of their data from not right in our area too. So then it's getting that local data to help support it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's when, the breeders have gotten a lot better even since I've been doing this over the last 6 years about giving a little bit more localized data, but at the same time, a lot of them aren't really working very far west into South Dakota. Like, it's not that far over and then they're kind of done with their research plots. It's more like I-29 corridor, eastern South Dakota. And we move a lot of corn out all the way out to the river and same thing in North Dakota and stuff. So trying to take those things that say, oh yeah, this will work great in the West. Well, if your West is Western Minnesota, we got to test it in central South Dakota to really see if it'll actually handle, those conditions. Some of them do, some of them don't. And that's why we have to do our own research to see that.
Yeah.
So
And talking about your own research, you also do farm some as well. So
yeah.
is that where you're able to try some of these different things that you're talking about
Uh,
to farmers and stuff like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I do farm a little bit myself. I took over the home farm, let's see, back in 2012. So it's got a few years in on that. So yeah, I do get to use my farm as a little bit of trying some new things and doing some experiments and things like that, which is great. Um, sometimes I've got the time there, but I get split a lot between, my job here and then trying to do that too. Kind of gets a little messy at times, but I do what I can to see how this works on my own farm as well.
So as you were getting into kind of the agronomy part of it
Hmm.
earlier in your career up to now, what's been like a a big turning point or something where you're like, oh, now I'm starting to like understand this a lot more? Was there stuff like, oh, I after I did a lot more reading or after I was more
Yeah.
in the field, like there was more where I could see, okay, now I understand a little
Yep.
bit more of agronomy or just basically more
Yeah.
experience.
So there's a couple of things that to me are kind of highlights as I come through that I think gave me a little bit more of a step change. And one of those was the first year we had Neil Kinsey in. Neil Kinsey, I say soils is kind of one of my other things that besides the seed side, really like dealing with soils and fertility. And when Neil came in the first time, I think, by noon I already had a headache. I didn't know which way to turn at that point. Going back, rereading his book, trying to fit pieces together, and then taking that out. And by that time, I had my farm, so I did my samples and then started looking at yield data and going, oh, okay, this is starting to make sense now. And I think that really helped having my own operation at the same time because I was able to take, this that is almost theoretical as you're learning it and then go look at it on your own farm and say, oh, yeah, no, this matches up. Okay. And then start making changes there that then really started filling in the blanks. And I was able to take that to growers and stuff and say, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is what I'm seeing on my own farm, and these are the results that I'm getting. And so that was one big one is that fertility side. Um, Seed side, man, that has just been a progression through the years. We look at, historical data on germplasm, and, there's just this kind of overarching genetic gain with time as new hybrids come forward. So that's great to see that it's still kind of on that trajectory. But then it really comes down to placement. And I think that was one of the hardest things early on is not understanding that placing the right hybrid, the right field, the right soil conditions, that there is something to that. It's not just, hey, I want a 98 day. It's okay, you want a 98 day. Which farm are you going to put this on? What's the fertility look like? What have you had for past issues? Because, disease can get you. I learned the hard way in one years ago that um, this is kind of when like triple stack corn was just coming in. And he said, yeah, I don't think I need any of that traded stuff. Okay, fine. Sold him just Roundup BT corn back then. And then I get a phone call that it all lodged. I'm like, well, okay, go out and look. There was no roots left on it. Well, that's when I found out it was like 7th-year corn on corn. I'm like, oh, maybe we should have had a trait or some insecticide here to try and control that. But some of those lessons that you learn the hard way are the ones you remember the most. So there's definitely been mistakes through the years too. But
Yeah. So, in some of these lessons that you've learned,
mhm.
especially in your area that you cover, like in Minnesota and
Yep.
Iowa, what are some things that you've learned out in fields that a lot of growers are kind of dealing with right now?
Yeah, I think some of that is, some of the insect and disease side that we see both in corn and soybeans that probably aren't being controlled as well as we could. There's a number, like white mold. If guys have problems with white mold, they tend to have a continual problem with white mold, and it's something every year. So they kind of get a plan of action for that. But then you get these ones that are sneaking up on us a little bit. Tar spot has shown up in southern Minnesota the last couple of years. So has southern rust. Um, Both of those we can get at least decent control with making a fungicide application at the right time, but it's that timeliness of doing it where 10, 15 years ago, we were looking at fungicide as strictly a plant health. We really weren't dealing with a lot of disease on a consistent basis. And when we were doing trials back then, like we might get a payback 1 out of 5 years on like a VT application on corn. Now I'm looking at that over these last few years, and it's been some pretty major results, you know, because of some of those diseases that are creeping up into our area a lot more. So being more proactive with disease management. Soybeans have been the same way. You know, a good seed treatment to get those beans up and rolling is kind of imperative as we get into cooler, wetter soils as I come north. And that's something that's still, there are a lot of guys are still shying away from, like thinking it's just kind of an additional cost. Like, no, it's kind of a necessity if you really want to push beans to their best potential. And with that, I've got more guys trying to plant beans earlier in the season. And so the earlier I go, the more I'm pushing, like, now you really need a good seed treatment to protect that seed.
Yeah.
So,
and speaking of like corn and soybeans, or even just new products that you're testing for research, is there a lot more newer, better stuff that keeps coming as you're looking at it? Or is it kind of a mix between there's a lot of good standard products, but then there's some things that you might want to look at going forward?
Yeah. So I say, and there's a little bit of both, because even some of the new seed treatments and stuff like that, in many cases, or in a lot of cases, there's not really a new active ingredient coming in there. Like maybe it's one new active. After that, it's kind of a combination of considerably older products for the most part. But still, formulation matters. And what I mean by that is that I've gotten into seed treatments because back when I worked at the Marshall store, I ran the seed treater for pretty much the entire time I worked there. An okay formulation, all of a sudden beans are sticky and you got to add more talc. They don't flow out of the tender right, which means they don't flow through the planter right. And so some of these newer seed treatments is sometimes it's just a reformulation to make things flow better, which is still a major improvement. But yeah, new active ingredients that are popping up from time to time, giving a little bit more specific control on certain diseases like Phytophthora or Pythium or something like that, which is great to see, because some of the older material may not be working as well as it used to, or it wasn't the best to begin with. So seeing some upgrades there is fantastic. But there's a lot of that as I look through the entire gamut, right? Because, we look at a lot of new herbicides and it's like, well, it's a new herbicide. A lot of times this is a new mix of some older herbicides, which is, there's no problem with that, but it's understanding that what it is. So yeah, absolutely see the same thing with seed treatments too. Sometimes it's just a new mix of older products and knowing how that can be beneficial.
Yeah, because there's a lot of new things coming out and new hybrids and varieties that are coming out all the time. So there's a lot of testing that goes into all of them. There's a lot of experimental numbers when we look through all the different trial areas, and then it's going and checking those out kind of in different areas. So,
absolutely. So yeah, like, and with some of the new technologies coming forward too, with Viconic and, some of the Enlist E3 plus Nemosphere and some of those new traits coming out in soybeans. It's been really interesting. That was just really last fall. I was able to really go look at some of those and where it's kind of, really kind of in the back corner and nobody's really talking about it. You don't know exactly what's there besides they're working on it, to last fall being able to go walk into a trial that there's 600 new varieties of that trait. That's pretty awesome to see. So
yeah, it's pretty cool to hear all the different things that are kind of happening and kind of your story coming into where you're at now. It's pretty awesome. But one of the things that I ask all the guests that have joined me on the podcast, I asked them, if you were going back into agronomy, like if you're coming out of high school or college and you're going into agronomy, or you're wanting to go to the farm, is there a lesson or two that you would recommend to them?
Well, that's a good question. I kind of came into this a little bit more unconventionally, having more background on the mechanical side. And that worked, because early on in my career with Hefty, I did work with the equipment side of it as well. So I kind of found that little bit of a niche, and that was great. But one of the things that I've spoken to my own kids about, like, find that thing that you really enjoy and dig into that really hard. Because throughout agronomy or agriculture in general, there's a lot of specialties that you kind of find that niche and get really good at it. And all of a sudden you've got a place almost anywhere with that, whether that is soils or the seed breeding or whatever. There's so many little sidelines. It's not just this overarching agronomy. There's a lot of little detailed things that you really need kind of that next step of education, and sometimes that's your own education, trying to handle that yourself, but try and find that niche that you really like.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I agree with that too, because whatever you're interested in, you're going to put a lot more effort forth, and you're going to be more wanting to put more hours in and just really focus in on that thing. Yep. And if you find different things like that, it's more enjoyable, and it just makes it a lot better every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, I mean, that's where I started digging into soils back, years ago, and that was really an enjoyable thing for me. Like it was very interesting. And so, yeah, I dug into that harder. And then as I've switched over to the research side, we look at a lot of different things. So sometimes I have to force myself to go look deeper into certain products that weren't really my forte. But at the same time, it's just triggered that next little niche side of that start digging into harder, and learn that spot that you really enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate you being on the show today. Thanks
Absolutely.
So much, John.
You bet.
And thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the Agronomy Answers podcast. Please check us out on social media, hit that follow button, leave a comment, and we'll see you next week.